Welcome to season 2 of the Jeremy Mullins podcast, where we take a deep dive into different educational topics to help you optimize your life. I am Jeremy, your host. I am here today with my co-coach / advisor inside the First Form app, Mr. Montae.
Thought you were gonna call me your co-host.
Co-host. I mean, you kind of co-host. I think Reno's off on vacation. He hasn't been coming on the podcast much here recently, but that's okay.
Vacation January?
I like to tease. He's got that other military job that he has to focus on and take care of. So I guess I can let him take care of that. But hey, I saw that you tagged me in a post on social media today for a giveaway. What was that about?
Oh, the homegrown lifting giveaway?
Yeah, you like that segment? See how I did that? That was smooth, right?
That was a good one.
Perfect one. So, today's episode brought to you by a homegrown lifting company out of the great state of Kentucky, who has some of the best prices when it comes to bumper plates and equipment. And they're giving a giveaway. I think it will be announced February 4th.
I didn't look at the date, but I made sure to tag people and share it to my story.
Yeah, so head on over there if you're looking to get maybe a chance to win some prizes. If not, once again, maybe you're not in the market for a home gym right now or any equipment, go like them on social media. I think it's one of the biggest things you can do to support small businesses, in their journey is like their social media aspects and the way it's out there. Speaking of supporting, hey, if you haven't left a review for the podcast, please go leave us a review. It helps us climb those rankings and helps other people kind of find us and get the education that we're going to cover not only today, but in future podcasts. But today, let's talk about the scale.
The good old, the best tool in the toolbox, right?
The only tool in the toolbox, right? Why, Montae, do you think people get fixated on the scale? What do you think is the big reason why a lot of people look at the scale and only the scale?
I would say just, from my experiences and what I've seen personally, and even what I've been through is marketing. Marketing from a lot of companies, the things you see on TV, everything is like lose weight quick, lose weight, lose weight. That's just what like everything is thrown at a lot of people. So that's what we think is the holy grail of like health and fitness is how much weight we can lose and how fast we can lose it.
Yeah. And with that being said, like, listen, the scale is still a great tool. And if you've got, 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds to lose, the reality is like we should see the scale moving. Now, there's going to be some cases there, whether it be secondary to inflammation, some water weight, gaining muscle tissue, that it might not move every single week. But over a period of 4, 6, 8 weeks, if you got that amount of weight to lose, you should see the scale moving. Right. I want to point that out because there's got to be some self accountability in here, of, okay, am I doing what I should be doing to see the scale move? But 100%, the scale is not the only tool that we should be using in our journey. Okay. And I would argue that most people don't need to be weighing in every single day. So let's start there. Okay. What is the scale? A normal scale, right? Because I know there's some out there that will estimate body fat percentage, but what a normal scale, what are the pros to it? How do we want to use it to set ourselves up for success?
So I would say this, the pros are too is, as you said, like we can see progress over time being made, but you had mentioned like why not to do it daily? And it's because that weight is going to fluctuate daily due to many different factors. And you kind of dived into it at the beginning, inflammation. I know for me personally, a bad night's sleep. If I have a bad night's sleep where I don't get good sleep, the scale goes up sometimes, even though I followed my nutrition to a T. So the stress factor, the lack of sleep, and then heavy training. So I noticed days like if I have a big leg day or Sunday, I went to the gym, I tagged you, and then I did the 5x5. I pretty much hit the big lift, all the major lifts, did 5 sets of 5. I was hurt like immediately that day. And the next day, the scale was up 5 pounds the next day.
I feel like you said I'm hurt. Like I feel like it hurts your soul and your body.
It hurt everything. It's one of those workouts, when you finish up and you just immediately know, like, took my post workout and everything, but we went out to hang out with some people afterwards. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh man, like this is going to be a good couple of days because I'm already sore from that workout.
Already feel it. I had that yesterday. We were doing it was Tom back squats. So it was 5 sets of 4. and you had to finish your back squat and go straight and grab a wall ball and do 15 to 20 reps with the wall ball. And it was just like, I was feeling good. I spent time warming up. I've been working on mobility. I'm actually going to physical therapy for mobility. Like, no, nothing's wrong, but I'm using physical therapy techniques to help me with mobility. Man, I was moving like 335 on there, 4 reps, wall ball, 15 reps. I'm like, it was kind of easy. But Jeremy, hey, you got to do this every 3 minutes. Your weakness is your conditioning, buddy.
Yeah.
So it's me talking to myself.
Did you say age or conditioning?
Yeah, both, right? Yeah. So I was trying not to give myself two negatives there, right? So then, second set, same weight, 335, pick the wall ball up, 15 reps. I'm like, man, I think I can do 20 wall balls. I think next time I'm going to do 20 wall balls. And I went back over and I looked, I was like, screw it, 355 on the bar, right? 355 off. I want to tell you that like it felt like I added 100 pounds to that barbell. So 3 reps, did not get 4 reps of 355, racked it back up, picked up the wall ball, did get 20 wall balls, because I felt like my ego was hurt and I couldn't get, all 4 reps with the 355. And then I realized, like, Jeremy, you got another set, buddy. So I'll go over there and I pull the weight off to 315, do 315, the final set, finish the wall ball, but like still had the conditioning to do afterwards. And it was like, I'm already feeling this, like hamstrings tight. I'm like, this is going to be a rough next half hour.
Yeah.
So I feel you when you said it hurt my soul and it hurt my legs.
Nice. But yeah, to answer that, like, just the pros is you can see that progress being made over time. And if you do have, a good amount of weight to lose, then we do want to see that go down and trend in a downward direction.
Yeah, and listen, a home scale, it's relatively inexpensive, and totally get it. There's can be some expensive, scales out there, but relatively everybody has one at home, right? So there's not a barrier of entry or barrier to get a test or reading done, right? It's very simple. But a couple of things I would say to get the best out of it, and you mentioned it, is make sure you do pay attention to the trend over time. Okay. We're basically 4 weeks into the new year right now. This could be 5 or 6 weeks by the time the podcast goes live. Unless you've been on point for 4 to 6 weeks, you really don't know what the trend is going to be yet. And that's what I tell everybody all the time. Like, because you could lose a bunch of weight the first week with some of that being water weight, and then you don't lose for a couple of weeks. It doesn't mean that you lost 6 pounds the first week and then 0 second and third. It means you're averaging 2 pounds of body fat loss per week. That's the way we got to look at the trend over time. And we don't know the trend until you're 4 to 6 weeks in. And that's 4 to 6 consistent weeks, right? And I'll say this, and I like to say it all the time, for a month, right? So a normal month, 30, 31 days. Unless you're consistent 26 to 27 of those days, like, you can't be upset that you're not getting results. Like, I wish inside of nutrition that you could be 80% on and 20% off all the time and produce results. That's not the case. A lot of times it's got to be more of that 90% that you're on point, and then 10% that you can be off, but not off by a lot, from that aspect. We talked about this. I don't know if it was a call you and I were doing, but like the weekends, right? If you're just over a few hundred calories on the weekends and you're under most days during the week, you're going to see progression. But if you're over on the weekend by, a couple thousand calories both days, that's not going to cut it when it comes to results.
Yeah, you're wiping out a lot of work.
So that's where, like, I don't ever put a certain percentage on, well, you got to be on point this percentage to see results. The reality is this: you got to be consistent over time to see where the scale is moving. Give yourself 4 to 6 weeks of consistency so that you know exactly what is expected to lose week in and week out. Okay. The other thing, when weighing in on a scale, try to pick a day where you keep everything relatively the same. And you mentioned some of these things earlier. Don't always weigh in the day after maybe a killer workout, right? If you and your training buddies are training hard on Saturdays, maybe if you're an endurance athlete and you're getting into running and you're doing runs on the weekends, then maybe Sunday mornings are not the best day to get that steady weigh in each week. Okay. Because you want to try to control everything you can control so that reading is as accurate as possible, and you don't have the standard deviation that can fluctuate for some of those things that we were discussing.
Yeah, because that throws people off mentally as well. I mean, there's so many different things in that. I tell people all the time, weigh in first thing in the morning. try to weigh in under the same circumstances, right? So you don't want to weigh in Monday, fasted, you haven't eaten or drinking anything, and then Tuesday it's noon and you go get on a scale after you've already had 2 meals and a half a gallon of water
Yeah.
and weigh yourself, because there's going to be differences because now you have food inside of you, you have water.
If we put this 16 ounces of purified water from Publix on a scale and it weighed 0.75 pounds, and I don't know exactly how much it weighs, but I'm just making up numbers here. And then I drank said water and then I hopped on the scale, I would be up the exact same amount that this water weighed. Right. So that is one thing that goes into, the scale is your water weight. So depending on how much fluid you have, a lot of people who start their journey, to be honest, you're dehydrated because you're not drinking enough water. Right. So if you're getting this initial weigh in, of weight, after whatever the holidays or whenever you're going to start your journey, you could be dehydrated because you haven't been drinking enough water. Then all of a sudden you start drinking water, because that should be part of every wellness program, is make sure that we're getting enough water intake. Then theoretically you could be properly hydrated on your next weigh in and the scale be up, as an example of why the scale doesn't move every single week.
100%.
Okay.
With creatine, people start taking creatine.
Creatine is another. So as a supplement, if you start taking creatine, you can expect the scale to be up a little bit. Once again, how much depends upon, if you're a smaller athlete versus a larger athlete, and how much muscle tissue you do have, because of course, more muscle tissue, the more creatine that you can store in the muscle tissue. But that is another reason, right? Because that is a water weight. I don't want to say issue, water weight, gain when you start taking creatine, because creatine is going to be stored inside the muscle cell, and then it will also store water along with it. No different than working up, if going back to you're a endurance athlete, that you're making sure that your glycogen levels are stored, or you are following a relatively low carbohydrate diet and you have more carbohydrate on the weekend. Okay, so when you fill up your muscle glycogen, you're going to pull water inside of the muscle cells along with that carbohydrate. Right. So that's when we start talking about water weight, that is what can be going on specifically related to water. Okay. The more muscle glycogen you have stored, more water you're going to hold with it. Right. Taking creatine, more water in the muscle. Now, it's not a bad thing, right? Because the muscles are hydrated, just how the body is working. Now, you mentioned inflammation. How would you describe general inflammation to someone when you're educating them? Like, how is that? What analogy to use? How do you describe it?
So inflammation is like just your body's natural response to injury, but your body doesn't really always know what it specifically is. So that inflammation. So you think about rolling your ankle. All right, there's going to be inflammation there. Your body's sending fluids to that area. It's going to help, circulation in there to help recover it. And it's the same way when you're training. Your body doesn't know that this is you going to the gym and going heavy on weights. It doesn't know the difference between those. So your body is, sending fluids to these areas. You're trying to recover to quote unquote heal that area. So the body's inflamed, and it's natural, and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And I love that example, right? Because most of us have turned an ankle before, right? So the ankle could swell up, so that is water weight to a degree. But I think inflammation, we have to understand a little bit different than just drinking more water, right? So inflammation, yes, that area is preventing itself. So you're going to pull some fluids to that area where it mobile or demobilizes it to prevent it from further injury. Okay. But any inflammation in the body is going to cause this to happen. So you think about having GI distress, right? Hey, I'm bloated. Bloated is an inflammation reaction to the GI system, right? You're going to pull water there. Menstrual cycles for ladies, same thing, right? You're holding on to water. That's the reason the scale will go up around your menstrual cycle. So all these things we need to take in consideration. Another inflammation you looked at, you mentioned that when we train hard and you're sore, that soreness is inflammation, right? For the muscle tissue to heal, it's going to pull some fluids there, which has some nutrients in it, right? But anytime that you have soreness, that's inflammation, and that can affect the scale. So we got to look at all of these, moving parts of going into why is this scale bouncing up and down. The other thing to note is the bigger athlete that you are, right? The more weight you have to lose, the heavier that you are, the more that scale will fluctuate. Okay. So someone that's 300 pounds is going to fluctuate a lot more than someone that is 140, 150.
100%.
Now, on the flip side, hey, if you're 140, 150 pounds, you're not going to lose as fast as someone that's 300. That is a big one that I see a lot of times is expectations. People come in, and if they lose 2 pounds the first week, which could be a little bit of body fat, but could be a little bit of maybe the muscle glycogen we talked about, or whatever the case is, they are expecting 2 pounds loss every single week. And I got a lot of ladies right now, specifically with this, that are around 140, 150 pounds. They're trying to lose 10, 15 pounds, and they've lost 4 pounds for the month. But they're frustrated right now because they haven't lost anything the last couple of weeks. I'm like, you're losing on average a pound a week. You've lost 4 pounds in January. It just happened to show up on the scale the first day, right? Or the first week. So you got to put it in perspective, guys and gals. If you're losing a half a pound of body fat on average per week, that is good. Some of our bigger losers, Montae, that lose 100 pounds in the year, and we look back at it, over the course of the year, like after maybe the first initial, some of that water weight loss, it's 1.25, just over a pound loss per week,
Right.
For most cases.
And that's the ones that had the big drop, because there was bigger individuals who didn't have that drop in the beginning.
Correct. So you have to look at that as a smaller athlete, guys. If you're, once again, 160 or less, you're not going to lose big numbers on the scale. And that's why the trend of how much did I lose in a 4 to 6 week period should become more of a goal. Hey, half a pound of body fat a week. You're 160 pounds. That is a good goal. It's a good goal to have. You're in a good spot, right? Yes, if you're a little bit more, maybe a little bit more weight there. Okay, so I think that's something to realize with the scale also. And then food consumption. Forgot to mention that. So I took some notes as you were talking about. Yes, we talked about water. We talked about inflammation. Food. So certain foods or certain things like sodium, for example, right? Not saying sodium is bad. I would argue that most people actually need a little bit more salt in their diet, especially if they're living a healthy lifestyle and they're exercising on a regular basis. You probably need more salt than what you think. But if you're consuming 3,000 milligrams of salt a day, 3,000 milligrams of sodium, whichever word you want to use there, and then all of a sudden you go out for the weekend and you consume 5,000 milligrams of sodium, right? Extra 2,000 milligrams, because a lot of times restaurants like to salt their food, then you're going to be up on the scale because you consume more salt, you hold on to more water short term. It's not a bad thing. You just have to recognize it. And I think those are the things that need to go into, and people need to look at the big picture of just the scale.
Absolutely.
Okay. That doesn't mean you should throw it out. It doesn't mean that's not a good tool. We're just wanting you to realize that, hey, it is going to fluctuate. And if it is messing with you on the mental side of things, you got to understand why it fluctuates. So I do have people that will weigh every day, and I'm okay with that as long as it is not messing with them from the mental standpoint. But if it's driving you off, quote, off the cliff, then you need to look at that relationship when it comes to the scale.
Yeah, like if you're weighing yourself and it's not moving the way you want it to do, so you're just like, F it, I'm gonna go eat all this food, or I'm not gonna do my workouts today, or this plan isn't working. Let's change things up, and in the consistency right there, because everything that's when it becomes a problem.
Or if it increases your stress, like, so if your stress load is increasing because you're expecting one thing on the scale and it's giving you something else, like that's something else to take in consideration. And like I said, right now, the trend that I see, is in my 140, 150 pound females, that lost like a couple pounds the first week, they were expecting to see that 2 pound loss every single week. And what happened was maybe they lowered the calories in the diet. So they depleted a little bit of the muscle glycogen, right? They depleted a little bit of that stored water that they had, so they lost a little bit more the first week, and then they don't see that loss coming up, versus taking a look at it now that we're 4 or 5 weeks into the year and be like, man, I'm down 4 pounds. All right, cool. You're averaging 0.75 pounds of body fat loss per week. That's what our goal is moving forward, right? And if we want to lose a little faster, then we need to make some adjustments. Those adjustments could be reducing caloric load inside of the diet, or it could be increasing calorie expenditure through movement. Those are the options that we have, based on the individual, and each person would be different which approach that we would take. All right. Now, what are some other ways that we can test success that is related to the scale?
So are you meaning like other things we might notice as far as progress outside of the scale?
No, I think where I'm going with this question is not necessarily like non-scale victories, right? But like body fat tests, photos, things that are directly related that we can measure, right? That is related to the scale. Because I would argue that photos, to a degree, are related to the scale, right? Yeah. Body fat tests, 100%. Always take a weight measurement to go along with that. So that's kind of where I go on that. Non-scale victories, I think we can address in a different separate episode. But let's talk about some body fat tests that's out there, and also the importance of photos.
So yeah, photos is a big thing, and I notice there's a lot of individuals that I have personally that I've worked with, even this week alone, that were upset about the scale, and I would go back to their starting photo and their photo now and do a side by side, and I would send it to them and be like, look at this, and they're like, oh my goodness, like that's a huge difference. Like you notice change in your body composition, the way you look in the mirror, even though the scale is not moving these big drastic numbers that we talk about. So photos has always been a big thing for me. And usually like when somebody's doing a check-in with me, before I even look at their weight, I look at their photos.
Yep. And that's something as, I talked offline, it takes skill, because we as humans, right, as individuals, if I asked you to look at your progress photos, if you're listening to me right now, you're walking or in the car, and I said, hey, I want you to look at your progress photos. What you're going to do is you're going to look at your troubled area, the area on your body that you dislike. That's what you're going to look at. I guarantee it. That is the way we're wired as humans. What I taught Montae early on in his coaching career is like, hey, don't look at, one picture than the other. You start with left shoulder, look at left shoulder, left hip, and you're just working down in like a grid format, comparing these photos. And that's what you have to do as an individual to look at the difference. What is the change in the tone? Do you see a little bit more, vascularity or shape in the muscle, one versus the other? Do you see a change in especially like small changes if we're comparing week to week? But what I would want people to do really, now that you're a month in, go back to the same thing, 4 to 6 weeks before you can really look at trends, is start comparing the photo from 4 weeks ago to now. And that's where it's a little easier for the individual to see the changes that they're making over the course of a month.
Yeah, and you don't start with that troubled area, the part that you hate the most, because once you see that, then everything looks like crap, right?
Yeah, you can have abs. Like I could have abs, and I see my second chin, and I'm like, man, I'm chunky, right? Like that's the way it is. I mean,
that's how we're wired.
Yeah, like I got it. But I think another, way, like outside of progress photos, because once again, easy to take them. Just have to have a camera. If you're using, for example, you're in the first form app, we know you're taking photos. So it's the barrier entry there is a little bit lower. Now, some barriers that comes to body fat tests is, okay, do you have the machine? Do you have the access to, the capability of doing a body fat test? Okay. Now, theoretically, there is one that you can do that has a low barrier of entry. What? Listen, all right.
I've been around you long enough. I know this test.
You know what's coming, right? So this is called the caveman body fat test. Okay. So what I need you to do for the listeners, please do not do this right now where you're currently at. I need you to go home and I need you to find the biggest mirror that you have in your house. And I want you to get this mirror out. I want you to stand in front of this mirror. Now, it's called a caveman body fat test for a reason, because I need you to be dressed like a caveman or a cave woman, which means nothing on, just you and your birthday suit. And I want you to jump up and down. So imagine that. Imagine you standing there in front of this mirror, jumping up and down. Okay. And here's how you assess this. If it jiggles and it ain't made for feeding babies or making babies, it shouldn't be jiggling. And that's the caveman body fat test. So wonder what I got to rate this podcast today. Show notes. PG-13 caveman body fat test. So we always do that one. If you've ever been to a lecture that I've done in person, that's kind of my icebreaker. I get people up and I literally have them jump up and down, and it's usually a pretty good laugh.
But it does, they keep their clothes on at the lectures.
Yeah, 100%. Never going to a lecture from Jeremy. All right. So body fat testing is great. I think a lot of people have in-body tests, so they can go to like local, for example, if you're in the Midwest, supplement superstores, a lot of your supplement stores will have will have these in-body scans. You still have to be aware that some of the same things apply for the scale. You want to make sure that your nutrition is the same, you sleep the same, because the standard deviation can vary based on water weight on those in-body scales. And don't compare week to week or scan to scan. Once again, look at the trend over time. And I generally don't start giving feedback for my clients until I get 3 or 4 of those scans so that we can see a trend. Okay. Because I've had people, once again, you can go in and drink 2 waters and hop on that scale, and it'll say that you're up 2 pounds of muscle. And a inexperienced person will be like, yeah, you've gained 2 pounds of muscle in the last week. No, you didn't. I'm sorry. I wish that you could gain muscle that fast, but that's not how it happens. All right. There's in-body, there's underwater weighing, there's bipods. Bipods underwater weighing are a little bit harder to find. There are a lot of medical companies that will have the DEXA scan, which is one that I would recommend people to do if you have the capability. I feel like it has the less standard deviation, as long as the person monitoring it and doing the test is skilled. It can get you the closest to what a true body fat percentage is. And then it tells you down to the gram, in a lot of cases, how much muscle tissue and how much body fat tissue you had. And on the flip side of what we try to do around the podcast and in Team Alpha is to get you healthy overall. It will give you your bone density scan. So that's something that I would encourage, if you have one in the area, for you to look at. And that's something you could do every 3 months. If you're just starting your journey, you're in your first year of your journey, do it every 3 months to kind of monitor your progress. So those are some ways. If you're just tracking like in an app, you're working with us and you're one of our clientele, or you're someone else's, on the First Form app, progress photos and consistent weigh-ins are probably going to be the best way that you guys can track that progress. Anything we missed? I feel like we did a pretty good job.
I think that's it.
Awesome. I will touch back on this, that self-accountability. Okay. You are not at a plateau if you haven't been consistent for 27 out of 30 days. You're not consistently hitting your protein. You're not consistently hitting your calories. You're not consistently getting your walk in. You're not consistently out there, doing your resistance training. If all that is consistent and you're not seeing results, then we as coaches can make adjustments. Maybe we need to lower your calories a little bit. Maybe we need to make some changes. But if you're not consistent, you can't be upset about the results that you're not getting when you're not putting the work and the effort in. So, love you guys. Appreciate you, Montae. Hope you have a great day, man. And I'll see you here in a few minutes on our team call.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.